All right, so our presentation is on Principle 4 from the Leave No Trace website. It is the Leave What You Find. And before we get going here, I've got some nice little fun facts to start us off. The first one being those trained in the Leave No Trace principles are 5 times more inclined to protect nature. And you might be thinking, why do I care? What's the point of protecting nature? There's so much of it. Does it really affect me? Well, believe it or not, it actually does. Preserving natural spaces is beneficial outside of the ecosystem conservation principles. 35% of the world's food crops depend on pollinators to reproduce, and as we'll get through our presentation here, you'll see that our principle directly relates to pollinators, and also wildflowers can help improve water quality, which obviously directly impacts us as humans. So to get us started here, our Leave No Trace principle has 4 main aspects to it. The first being preserve the past. So observe cultural or historic structures and artifacts, but do not touch them. They're for everybody to enjoy. There's no reason for you to be going around messing with them. Leave rocks, plants, and other natural objects as you find them. That is the second main aspect. Number 3 is avoid introducing or transporting non-native species into an ecosystem where they're not from. And 4 is do not build structures, furnitures, or dig trenches. So basically just try not to make any physical alterations to the space if you can help it. Okay, and then we're gonna dive into some more specific situations here. So the first one here is avoid damaging live plants and trees. Damage to trees, such as hammering nails, can cause the trees to be more susceptible to disease and also long-term damage. Removing flowers can directly impact pollinators, kind of how I mentioned before, and they depend on such flowers, and it also impacts the ability of the flower species to reproduce. So obviously if you're going around picking flowers and stuff, they don't have as much of a chance to drop their seed out and reproduce as a species. So the LNT actually recommends taking pictures or sketching the flowers, but please try your best to leave them where they are, as pretty as they may be. And then also, when picking edible plants, please ensure that you are not disturbing rare plants or completely depleting the vegetation, because as I said before, these natural spaces are for everyone to enjoy, so don't go around eating all the veggies. Alright, number 2 here is leave natural objects and cultural artifacts as you find them. So natural objects of beauty or interest are for everyone to enjoy, don't steal them. They may also even play important ecological roles, such as providing nutrients or habitats to different species. These objects oftentimes are also legally protected in national parks and many other park types, so there is a legal reason to leave them be. And actually, if you go on the National Park Service website, they say that you can incur fines of up to $250,000 and years in prison. So you don't want to be that guy sharing a cell with an armed robber and you stole a rock. That's not going to be very fun. And then, yeah, as I've stated before, you could be messing up another species, habitat. So if I go into Finn's house and I move around all his furniture and I steal his silverware, Finn's not gonna invite me over again. You're doing the same thing there. You don't want to go around moving stuff that doesn't belong to you. And then we'll move on to minimizing site alterations. So when you're camping or exploring, it's important that you leave the sites exactly how you found them when you first arrived. Moving rocks and digging trenches can promote unwanted erosion, and building rock cairns can confuse hikers by causing navigational issues. And rock cairns, if you can see it, are actually these nifty little rock structure statue type things that people think are really cool to build, but actually they act as markers for hikers to follow, but they're not actually meant to be followed because they're built by people who came in there and moved all the rocks when they weren't supposed to be moving. And so the hikers can often get confused, and if you've ever seen 127 Hours, you don't want to be stranded out in the middle of nowhere because you took a wrong turn because someone built a rock cairn. Obviously you don't want that. And then the final point we have here pertains to invasive species, as I mentioned before. So do not transport species across different areas. They may be invasive to that specific ecosystem and they can cause substantial harm. And so what you want to do is ensure that all of your gear, such as your boots and your tents, are cleaned regularly. You want to make sure that there's no species like bugs, spiders, anything like that lurking around in your boots, because then you bring it home, You bring those boots to another ecosystem, and all of a sudden you've caused a major catastrophe. And then something else is also making sure that your boats are properly dried out and removing any sort of species that might be on those boats before you move that boat to a different water source. And then we were also supposed to find one supporting document from the LNT website. I have that here. I'm just gonna go through it real quickly. So this, here, let me find it. This comes from the American Indian Alaska Native Tourism Association. Big mouthful there. And basically they've brought out these documents as educational content for non-indigenous guests to their tribal lands. And this is a lot of information here. I'm not gonna read all of it in depth, but going over some of the points here, these first two kind of go hand in hand. The second and third do. The first one is indigenous means today, which means even though sometimes when we think of Native Americans, we think of like Christopher Columbus days where we came and stole all their stuff. There's still indigenous people who live in this country, believe it or not, and they still have lands that they own and they have a right to. And oftentimes people are going in and doing all of these things that we said not to do. And so not only is it messing with the natural ecosystem, but it's also messing with the people who actually own that land. And then the second and third go hand in hand. It deals with responsible visitation and impacts caused by uninformed guests, which is basically just restating kind of everything we said here. And then the fourth one here talks about the difference between native and public lands, and there's a lot of information there, but the main takeaway is that oftentimes it's hard to tell what's public and what's native. And so you really want to make sure that you're following this principle no matter where you are, because you don't want to be trespassing and moving stuff around on native land. And then the fifth one is just talking about ways that visitors can be a part of the solution, and that solution is knowing all 7 of the leave no trace principles, and obviously ours number 4 is involved with that. Okay.
All right, so I wanted to touch on and go over a little bit of like the regional differences. I wasn't quite able to find anything varying region to region in the United States. It was more so on a global scale, continent to continent, country to country, and so on and so forth. So the first regional difference that I have is in some regions of the world, our principle is used so that professionals can properly excavate and care for sensitive items, which correlates directly towards preserve the past and leave the things that are originally there alone so that somebody else may come and check it out before you go and alter everything yourself and ruin a tablet that you may have found from like the 1400s. This is a lot more prevalent in Europe, Northern Africa, the Middle East, where society started out a lot earlier on and technology started earlier on. So it's a lot more prevalent over there, more so than it is like here in North America. Another one of the regional differences is most parts of the U.S. prioritize this principle to mitigate the growing issue of invasive species and the harm that they cause. One of the main things that I can think of off the top of my head is the Burmese pythons that are in Florida. They were introduced as pets in like the 90s and introduced in small numbers to help try to take care of rodents and other small animals like that earlier on in America's history to try and get rid of some problems, but ultimately they ended up causing more harm than benefit strictly because they're an apex predator and they compete directly with the American alligator, American crocodile, and other reptiles and amphibians in that area for the same source of food, and they're slowly pushing a lot of Native American species towards that brink of endangerment due to the fact that they were introduced. Invasive species, they almost always cause a lot of issues. Another one that I learned about just this past weekend when I was camping with Dr. Winovan's class was, I want to say it was a spruce tree. Anyways, it was a tree that takes up a lot more water than a lot of the native Texas plants. So therefore it causes a lot of the other flora to die out due to the fact that they're not able to absorb as much water due to this tree. The last principle for like the regional differences would be for less traveled areas, spread out when you're in a group to avoid tampering with too much land. And this is strictly because there is a lot more going on under our feet than we realize. When you're walking through the dirt and you're walking through the mud or kicking rocks and breaking down plants, these plants and animals could potentially be like a keystone or cornerstone species for an environment. And if you're walking in this big group and you're knocking over grass and all these bushes, then you might be destroying a habitat for some of these pollinators like Dylan was talking about earlier, which ultimately is just going to create havoc in that small ecosystem. So in a brief summary, we've talked a lot about invasive species, minimizing site altercations, leaving natural items and culture items behind and letting other people look at them first before you decide to get greedy and put your hands all over them. Leaving all animals or organisms that you may find on you behind, whether that be like ticks, water, different things like that, because the last thing you want to do is go and contaminate another ecosystem strictly because you had a little bit of residue water on your boot, and then you step in another ecosystem and it brings disease to the entire place. And then just to not build or alter, dig trenches, build these little rock structures that throw hikers off their trails, strictly because whether it's for us or for animals, it can be confusing when it comes to navigating. But yeah, I think it's time for our activity.
Let's see where we're at. Oh my.
Okay. So for our activity, we're doing like a mock archaeological finding. So essentially what I did is before y'all got here, I hid an item somewhere in my backyard. And we're gonna go over the correct procedure and process to go through if you find something and you're not sure if you should take it and leave or if you should leave it. We're just gonna kind of run through that little process and like a little mock archaeological finding. So today I am digging around in my backyard. Oh my gosh. Yo, I found something. Come check this out.
Whoa. What did you find?
I found a pizza candle.
A pizza candle.
I found a pizza candle buried in the fire pit in my backyard.
Let's take a look. Awesome. All right, well, what do you think we should do with it, Finn?
I personally really want to take it home and light the candle.
While that might seem like a good idea, I bet you this pizza candle has probably been in this ecosystem for way longer than we could possibly imagine. It's probably got a lot of importance to the ecosystem around here and the species that live here. And also, we do want to leave it here for other people to enjoy. So, according to the leave no trace principle number 4, leave what you find, we should probably put it back and leave it exactly how we found it.
I think you're exactly right. A lot smarter than I am.